from the News Channel 5 Network. This is OpenLine.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to OpenLine. Thank you for being with us tonight. We appreciate you being here for OpenLine. We all know that Nashville is called Music City, and when we talk about Music City, a lot of us think country music, but there are other genres that make this city, Music City, so great, and that's what we are talking about tonight. I want to introduce you to our guests tonight. We have Lorenzo Washington from the Jefferson Street Sound Museum, and also Katie Rainge-Briggs from the National Museum of African American Music. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
I'm so glad that we have an hour to discuss both museums, their contributions to the city, and also the role that Black artists have had here in Nashville in shaping our sound as a city. I want to start off with the National Museum of African American Music because we're celebrating the first anniversary.
Yes.
That's exciting.
Very exciting, very exciting.
A lot's been going on in the past year, but Katie, first of all, just tell me, for folks who haven't visited, more about what the museum offers, the mission, the focus.
Well, it's important to understand that the museum is rooted in history. While it's super entertaining and you can connect with your favorite music genres, you're also learning a lot about American history, specifically African American history. We start off with Rivers of Rhythm, and that takes you down a timeline in American musical history that demonstrates the pivotal role African Americans played in developing such music. And then we have our galleries, Wade in the Water, One Nation Under the Groove, Love Supreme, and The Message. And that'll cover things from and Crossroads. So Crossroads being our blues gallery, and then we have a gospel, and R&B, and jazz, and hip hop.
Wonderful. We have so much to talk about because I know a lot of this. I mean, people think museum and they think, can kind of be dull sometimes. This is not dull. It's very interactive. Yes,
right.
That's a good way to put it. And we have video to show throughout the night. So if you haven't been there, we're going to entice you to go. And also, this is OpenLine. Let me invite you to call in. If you have been to either one of these museums, we would love to hear your thoughts on it. Or if you saw a great artist in town that you think is worth talking about tonight, kind of taking a stroll down memory lane, let's talk about that as well. The number is on the bottom of the screen. 615-737+ is the number. Lorenzo, please tell us more about the Jefferson Street Sound Museum.
Well, the Jefferson Street Sound Museum is a community museum. What I do there, I am the curator and the founder of the Jefferson Street Sound Museum. And what I do is tell stories about some of these great artists and musicians, especially the ones that I knew. And I knew so many of them, and that's what got me started with the Jefferson Street Sound Museum. So many of these artists, was afraid their legacy was going to be just lost. It was going to disappear. And so I took my house and turned my house into a museum.
Wow.
I had no intention of starting a museum. But once I start hanging pictures and doing things in the building to represent these artists and musicians, then they start calling it a museum. And that's how it got to be the museum that it is. And I'm proud of it, though.
You said that artists were afraid that what they had done would be lost. Is that because of what happened to Jefferson Street when I-40 was brought through, or are there other factors here?
Well, after Jim Crow, a lot of the clubs start closing down. A lot of the businesses start closing down because at that point, blacks could go anywhere in the city and shop. When at one point, most of their shopping was designated to Jefferson Street. And Jefferson Street was the only street in the city that we could actually call our street. and we had businesses. We had 3 banks, we had clothing stores, we had drugstores, ice cream parlors. We had some of everything that you would need for survival in that area and on that street.
But it changed.
It changed. When I-40 came through, it destroyed the traffic flow. Yeah. And they start tearing down the houses and the businesses in order to make way for the bridge.
I read today, and I never knew this, I've known about the history of I-40 coming through, but it displaced 1,000 residents. I did not know it had that big of an impact.
Oh, yes,
1,000.
it did. All over North Nashville. You know, it didn't just impact the ones on Jefferson Street, but for at least a 2-mile radius area. I lived across the bridge, and the interstate came around Jefferson Street and across the bridge, and it got us in East Nashville. So it didn't only affect North Nashville, but it affected East Nashville and South Nashville also.
Makes it easier to understand. We already have a caller, so let's jump to the lines. Michael is on the line. Michael, thank you for being with us tonight.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hello, Lorenzo. This is Mike Turney.
Mike Turney. Yes, Mike.
Go ahead.
This is Mike Turney from Papa Turney's Barbecue.
Yes, I know you. How are you?
I'm doing great, man.
Good.
And I just wanted you to speak to the when Jimi Hendrix was on Jefferson Street and that whole genre of music that passed through there with Jimi Hendrix and Billy Cox and all those guys.
Perfect.
Yes,
Michael,
yes.
thank you. Or Mike, thanks for calling in. Let's do that. Let's take a stroll down memory lane here. You hear Jimi Hendrix.
Yes, yes.
Tell me about his life in Nashville, his sound in Nashville.
Well, I saw Jimi Hendrix walk up and down Jefferson Street because I was over there chauffeuring Ted Jarrett at the time. Ted Jarrett was one of the producers and writers, and he recorded and worked with a lot of different artists that hung out on Jefferson Street. So hanging over there with Ted Jarrett gave me a chance to be in the midst of this music scene. And I did see Jimi Hendrix at the Del Morocco, and he also lived about half a block up from the Del Morocco upstairs in this boarding house. So I got a chance to see a lot of the artists, Ike and Tina Turner, on Jefferson Street. So it was a lot of action. Herbert Hunter, Marion James, Jackie Shane. I didn't actually see Jackie Shane, but Jackie Shane was one of my favorites artists.
When you saw the likes of Jimi Hendrix or I know Nat King Cole, could you tell something was different about them? You know, Ike and Tina Turner, that they were going to make it.
Oh yeah. Well, start with Nat King Cole. Now, he didn't hang out down on Jefferson a lot. Now, he hung out up at the Brown's Dinner Club. And he hung out a little bit over at the Maceos. But the Maceos wasn't on Jefferson Street. They were off Jefferson Street. But a lot of B.B. King, Ray Charles, all of these guys hung out. And matter of fact, in the house that I'm in on Jefferson Street where the museum is, Hank Crawford used to live in that house. And Hank Crawford was Jimi Hendrix's saxophone player and vocalist. And so I've heard from a number of artists, and I didn't see this, but I've heard that Ray Charles has actually been in that house. And where I'm gonna revise the studio, I've got a studio in that building, and in that room where the studio is now is where Hank Crawford used to live, in that room. So that's a special place, you know, but God set me there in that building, and I'm gonna do all that I can to make it successful.
He gave you a purpose.
He did.
Yeah. Okay, we have another call to take. Let's get to Robert here. Robert, good evening to you. Go ahead.
Yes, I was coming. When I was a kid, I used to come across town. Me and some friends of mine come across town and go to Jefferson Street. That was a highlight. They go to Rich State and all the way down Jefferson Street. And back in the day, Ray Charles, half of his band came from Tennessee State. Along with the backup singer, the McQuarrie sisters, they were Ray Charles' band as well too.
Right.
Jefferson Street used to be jumping.
Thank you, Robert, for calling in. A lot of folks sharing their memories, and that is something that the museum, the National Museum for African American Music, does, is records these oral histories, right? So folks will know exactly what the scene was.
I think music is a cultural transmitter. It tells a story of folks' lived experience, and I think that that's something that the museum really augments. What we just did was allow another generation to imagine Jefferson Street before. And we were able to place real human narratives in that through the music.
Right.
And that's what you're going to experience when you walk through the museum. A real humane narrative of the experience of the people during these different times.
I love that. All right, we have to sneak in a commercial break, but we are off and running. So stay with us for this Open Line hour as we talk about the full sound of Music City. Stay with us.